Winston Churchill. The name alone conjures up images of cigars, victory signs, and steely speeches that defied a continent crushed by fascism. A symbol of grit, of freedom, of doing the right thing when it mattered most. But what if I told you that the same man who saved Britain also oversaw policies that starved millions, crushed independence movements, and treated vast parts of the world like Britain's private playground? Today, we're taking a closer look at the real Winston Churchill, the hero Britain needed and the villain millions never forgot. Churchill's legacy isn't simple. He's not just the wartime savior Britain clings to, and he's not just the brutal imperialist his critics love to tear down. The truth is harder to swallow. Churchill was a man of his time, and in many ways, he represented the worst parts of it. He helped save democracy in Europe, but he also trampled it underfoot wherever the Union Jack happened to fly. You can't tell Britain's story without him, but you can't tell it honestly without the blood on his hands either. If you like your history messy, complicated, and a bit uncomfortable, you're in the right place with tenfold gold. Please, friends, give this video a like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next time we dig into the past without the rose-tinted specs. In 1940, Britain was staring down the barrel. France had collapsed like a bad souffle, and Nazi Germany was steamrolling everything in sight. The smart money said Britain should cut a deal, maybe keep its empire, save a bit of face, and call it a day. Plenty of politicians were quietly floating the idea. But Churchill? Not a chance. He wasn't interested in honorable terms or polite defeats. He planted himself in Downing Street like an immovable bulldog and made one thing very clear: Britain would fight. In the air, on the seas, on the beaches, and if necessary, with broken bottles in the streets. It wasn't bravado, it was bloody-minded defiance, and it gave Britain a glimmer of hope when almost everyone else had given up. Now, Churchill wasn't just fighting battles on the beaches, he was fighting battles inside people's heads. Morale in 1940 was like a sandcastle at high tide, fragile, crumbling, and one good German bombing raid away from washing clean out to sea. Churchill understood that winning hearts was just as important as winning battles. His speeches weren't polished spin, they were pure adrenaline, wired straight into the national bloodstream. We shall never surrender, their finest hour, blood, toil, tears, and sweat. These weren't just words, they became part of Britain's DNA. Every battered town, every sleepless night in a bomb shelter, every rationed meal, they all became a little bit more bearable because Churchill made people believe they were part of something worth fighting for. He didn't just lead the country, he lit it up. Here's a detail that often gets brushed aside. Churchill didn't just rally Britain, he held the entire Western world together while waiting for the Americans to show up. From 1940 to late 1941, Britain was basically the last one standing. No American tanks, no Hollywood war montages, just rationed books, blackout curtains, and a very real possibility that Britain could be flattened or invaded any day. And Churchill knew it. He spent months desperately working two fronts, keeping morale high at home and sweet-talking Roosevelt into giving Britain enough aid to survive without technically dragging the United States into the war, yet. It's easy now to think of World War II as a grand Allied team effort, but for a grim stretch of time, it was really just Britain, stubbornly clinging to the idea that not everything had to fall to fascism. And without Churchill's sheer bloody-minded persistence, there might not have been anything left for the cavalry to save. Of course, Churchill's stubbornness wasn't always heroic. Sometimes it was catastrophic. Case in point, the Bengal famine of 1943. While Britain was still fighting the Nazis, millions of people in India, Britain's so-called jewel in the crown, were starving to death. Not because there wasn't enough food, but because Churchill's government kept shipping grain out of India to stockpile it for Europe and British troops abroad. When warnings about the famine started flooding in, Churchill brushed them off. He blamed the Indians themselves, muttering that they bred like rabbits, and shrugging off the deaths as an unfortunate side effect of war. Because of Churchill's actions, 3 million people died, and not from enemy bombs or battlefield losses, from bureaucratic indifference. It was empire management by spreadsheet, cold, callous, and utterly devastating for the people who just happened to be on the wrong side of the British balance sheet. And if you think Churchill's callousness was just a wartime blip, think again. Long before World War II, Churchill was happily brainstorming new ways to keep Britain's colonies in line, and he wasn't squeamish about it. After the First World War, facing rebellions in the Middle East, Churchill argued for the use of chemical weapons against what he charmingly called uncivilized tribes. To him, gassing civilians wasn't some grim last resort. It was an exciting opportunity for a scientific experiment. He didn't see moral outrage, he saw efficiency. Cheaper than sending in soldiers, quicker than negotiating, and a handy reminder of who was boss. It's the kind of cold-blooded imperial thinking that rarely makes it onto the bronze plaques and history textbooks, but it's there, hiding just beneath the surface of the wartime legend. If there was one thing Churchill hated almost as much as the Nazis, it was the idea that Britain might have to give up its empire. Especially India, the crown jewel, the pride of British colonialism. While millions of Indians pushed peacefully for self-rule, Churchill dug his heels in and lashed out. He called Gandhi a half-naked fakir and treated the entire independence movement like an annoying uprising of ungrateful subjects. And he wasn't just rude, he was dangerous. Churchill actively blocked famine relief, refused political negotiations, and did everything he could to strangle India's chances of freedom for as long as humanly possible. Even after the war, when Britain was broke, battered, and barely clinging on, Churchill clung even harder to the fantasy of an eternal empire. For him, the British flag wasn't just a symbol of home, it was a brand of ownership, stamped on countries and people, whether they wanted it or not. So what do we do with all this? With the Churchill who gave Britain its finest hour, and the Churchill who left millions gasping in the dust of empire. The truth is, he wasn't a monster, but he wasn't a saint either. He was a man of his time, and often the worst instincts of his time, wrapped up in a cigar and a bulldog growl. He believed absolutely in Britain's right to rule the world, in the superiority of empire, in a racial hierarchy that sounds stomach-churning today, but was mainstream thinking among his class back then. At the same time, he also believed absolutely in standing up to tyranny, even when it looked like a death sentence. He helped save democracy in Europe, while suffocating it everywhere else Britain planted its flag. And if that sounds messy, good, because real history is messy. It's not about picking heroes to worship or villains to burn. It's about facing the fact that sometimes the same man can be both, and that the cost of greatness is often measured in blood, just not always the blood we like to remember. Churchill saved Britain when Britain needed saving most. That much is true, and it matters. But millions in India, Africa, and the Middle East paid a different price for his vision of Britain's greatness, and that truth matters too. Maybe the real hot take isn't that Churchill was a hero or a villain. It's that he was both, and pretending otherwise doesn't make history cleaner. It just makes it less honest. Sometimes the same man who roared for freedom at home was the one snuffing it out abroad. And maybe, just maybe, we're grown up enough now to remember him that way. If you enjoyed peeling back the myth and looking at the mess underneath, give the video a like and make sure you're subscribed for more hot takes on history. We've got plenty more uncomfortable truths and a few uncomfortable laughs still to come.